Welcome to Washington in Focus, your source for the week's top stories in the state of Washington. I'm Cole Lauterbach, managing editor of the Center Square Newswire service. This week, we'll be discussing cities in Western Washington coming out against ballot propositions to be decided in the November election, a state law contributing to a local sheriff's budget troubles, boosting pay for jury duty, and murder hornets making a potential comeback just in time for Halloween. That's ahead on Washington in Focus. I'm Cole Lauterbach.
Some people would call him a loser. He ran for state office. He was beaten. He started a business. He failed. He ran for Congress. He lost. He was nominated for vice president. He lost again. But he knew only those who never tried are the real losers. And Abraham Lincoln was no loser. Persistence. Pass it on. From the Foundation for a Better Life at values.com.
Welcome back to Washington in Focus. I'm Cole Lauterbach. Now, let's jump into the headlines. Cities in Western Washington are taking stands against ballot propositions to be decided next month. The four initiatives represent reversals of some of Governor Jay Inslee's signature initiatives and landmark achievements of the progressive state legislature. Seattle reporter Spencer Pauly has been tracking these resolutions. Spencer, what are they saying?
Well, there's a whole lot of Washington cities coming out within the last month or so. They're saying these ballot measures result in hindered progress to goals of moving from fossil fuels to clean energy, which a lot of these more progressive cities are trying to do. But also these ballot measures eliminate funding for education, children's programs, so that could impact families. And then the main thing is that, there's a large hole in the state's budget that results from this, and that all kind of scares these city councils that are kind of going out of their way now to speak out against these oppositions, despite plenty of their residents coming out of their way to sign for these ballot measures to be placed on ballots for the next month. Now, I'll be real quick just to tell what these ballot measures are that the city councils are going after.
Go ahead.
Initiative 2109, which repeals the state's capital gains tax. Initiative 2066, which repeals provisions of a new state law aimed at hastening Puget Sound's energy transition away from natural gas. And there's also Initiative 2124, making the state's Washington Cares long-term care program optional. And then the last one is Initiative 2117, which would end the state's carbon credit cap and trade program. Now, that last one is the one that we're seeing the most number of city councils going out of their way to publicly oppose.
Mm-hmm. Now, and to be clear, there's been a lot of campaign verbiage from opponents on these initiatives saying that, for instance, early childhood care and school funding would vanish if these initiatives are repealed, and they make it seem like this money has been here for years. In some cases, we're in year one of this funding, or in other cases, the funding has not even hit where it's supposed to go yet. And so it's saying, well, it will go away because it will go away in future years. But TJ has done a lot of reporting on this to kind of parse through what is exactly the reality of these. But the promoters of these initiatives, Let's Go Washington, State Representative Walsh, their slogan has been pretty clear: vote yes, pay less. Correct. And that, I think what you're saying, you hit a nerve in your story is, most of these cities are fairly progressive Western Washington cities, but this represents less money for those cities because they would be on the receiving end of a lot of these green initiative things, for the cap and trade auction, the carbon trade auction, and the carbon or the capital gains tax also would have a lot of that money go towards future education spending that would make their budgeting process quite a bit easier. Do you think that's a bit more of the motivation beyond just ideological?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I don't think any of these councils really went out of their way to say that publicly. But when you really think about it, all these cities are dealing with, budget deficits of their own kind. And at the same time, they're trying to improve air quality or electrification projects, trying to change up their infrastructure. And all these projects rely on this funding. If you cut that, where else do you go to get this? And that kind of hurts their goals, these goals of 100% clean energy by 2050,
right?
Whatever have you, are totally off scrapped if that's the case, if these ballot measures pass. But at the same time, that saves the taxpayers money. That's the other thing that city councils didn't really go out of their way to mention, I think.
Yeah, I mean, and that's really the gist of the supporters, thought is that all of these initiatives, while are come off as very well intentioned, are wildly expensive for those who pay it, and the capital gains tax, as at this point, it's limited to people of a certain income, and it's exempted for real estate and other things. But there was already a bill filed that would move that threshold downward and make it so that one capital gains tax hits many more people in the state. But the one issue that affects almost everybody is the carbon auction, where it increased the gas price via the additional tax up to almost 50 cents per gallon.
Yeah.
And, supporters of the initiative had these, events where they would roll back the price at local gas stations so that you could pay the cost per gallon of a much lower, non-carbon auction era price at the pump. Now, you spoke to Representative Walsh about this. What did he say about these resolutions that these cities are sending off?
Well, I'm not going to lie. I hardly talked to Representative Walsh, so it was kind of interesting to hear some of the words he used and some of the names, but that includes the limousine left and the bumbling billionaires. But so basically what he said is these resolutions are theatrical, and he emphasized that they don't do much. And these bumbling billionaires against the People's Initiative are pressuring these local governments, who he refers to as limousine left, to push these resolutions out, publicly opposing as like a scare tactic, I should say, against their residents. Now, Walsh said there's two reasons why city governments are in opposition as well. And that's one, money, like we talked about, loss of revenue for these initiatives. And then also it's virtual signaling, saying their egos and vanity are desperate for recognition from the progressives, from the progressive community. Yeah.
And now also too, these are very progressive cities. I mean, you live in Seattle, and the cities surrounding Seattle are a large progressive Democratic strongholds. So these don't really come as much of a surprise. But what did shock me was, not shock me, but it caught my attention, I would say, is these weren't unanimous in the support for all of these resolutions, correct?
In some cases, it shocked me in Seattle, for one. Seattle City Council Chair Sarah Nelson abstained from voting, saying maybe we shouldn't have, as a governmental body, take a leading role in this election. Maybe we should not state our general opinion about this and leave it for voters to decide, find their own information. And that's something I've heard from also Vancouver. One council member spoken out, and that's the Sammamish. And they all say there's no reason for governmental bodies to take a public stance on these ballot measures. And that's one thing I think that stuck out to me, why I pursued the story, is it's so interesting to see that. It just comes off very partisan.
Well, and you've reported on Nelson, with the Seattle City Council now for quite some time. And while she is still fairly, progressive in terms of the entire spectrum, she comes off as a pragmatist and a bit more of a realist than what you're used to seeing from the previous city council, as evidenced in her spearheading the rollbacks of some of the progressive early, like 2020, 2021 initiatives that a lot of people have said enabled more homeless and more crime in the city. So, I mean, like you said, that doesn't shock me, but from her, it almost seems to track to say, listen, this is not our deal. This is not appropriate for us to be doing. But it will be interesting to see how that, if indeed that does have any effect whatsoever. I mean, it's, like a celebrity endorsement. Really, do I care what Lady Gaga says about who I should vote for? Does that really move the needle, Taylor? But
right.
Thank you, Spencer. Appreciate it. Spokane County and cities therein are facing budgetary challenges. The county's sheriff is no different. But the law enforcement agency is asking the county for a budget increase, citing serious shortages of manpower. Eastern Washington reporter Tim Clauser reported on the budget ask. Now, how much more is the department asking, Tim?
Yeah, Cole, the sheriff's office went to the county commissioners and asked for almost 15% more year over year than 2024, taking the total budget over $62 million, which is about $8 million more than it budgeted this year. 82% of that budget is salary and benefits, so there's not much they can do there without decreasing manpower, which isn't much of an option right now considering they're already trying to fill over 30 plus vacancies. Overtime is also up with general operational expenses following. The sheriff attributed the 7.2% increase in overtime to that lack of manpower, which you mentioned, something that a lot of different agencies are dealing with right now across the state and country.
Yeah, and you say 30 officer shortage. Spokane County Sheriff's Office is, I mean, it's a big metropolitan center, but in comparison to like Pierce County and King County, obviously, it's not a huge sheriff's office. So 30 officers short is a significant percentage. Yeah,
it definitely is. And it's not just the unincorporated areas of the county that the sheriff's office is catering to. The city of Spokane has its own police force, but a lot of other surrounding municipalities are too small to support one on their own. So they contract with the sheriff's department to provide that. So when you're losing positions at the sheriff's department, you're not only losing that for the unincorporated areas of the counties, you're also losing it for those smaller rural communities that are already struggling. I mean, as is. I mean, and the vacancies is one thing. They're struggling to hire right now. They are making hires, but with the turnover rate being so high, it's difficult to stay on top of staffing, especially with the stigma around law enforcement right now, kind of disincentivizing new hires from approaching the field.
Now, one thing that you had quoted the sheriff's office on caught my attention, and we had reported on this when this law had initially passed about how it would affect public taxpayer-funded agencies. But the office said that the paid family leave law in Washington state is having an effect. It's moving the needle in terms of creating an ongoing rolling shortage of officers out in the county.
Yeah, and I talked to actually one of the undersheriffs about this after our article published, and they said, the paid family medical leave, as much of a benefit as it is to deputies, it is affecting the department's staffing. They have around 30 or so vacancies, and that number goes up and down, but they said at any given moment, there's around 20 plus officers also out completely or under reduced duties due to the paid family medical leave. So that's just kind of exacerbating the issue with understaffing and overtime, because whenever those officers aren't on duty, that doesn't mean that work goes away. It means that it has to be picked up through overtime by other deputies.
Now, the county, much like a lot of municipalities and levels of government across the state and the country after COVID funding ran out, they're facing budget shortfalls, if not just tight budgets. With this 14% increase in total budget ask from the sheriff's office, was there any feedback from county officials about this to hint that, they might not be able to make that request happen?
Well, I mean, the county had lots of questions, which the sheriff's office was able to answer. But when it comes down to departments like detention services, the sheriff's office, those are the departments where, I mean, as much as you can ask for a flat year over year budget due to tax revenue shortfalls and other revenue shortfalls, I mean, there's only so much they can handle. I mean, they could do a flat year over year budget, but that doesn't mean that they're going to keep the same amount of operational capacity that they have now. With inflation going up, so does those salaries and benefits, operational costs, etc. So, I mean, they weren't happy that it was so much higher, but I think it was really expected. The county is going to each department saying, hey, you guys need to plan for a flat year over year budget. But they've said, they were expecting this from the sheriff's office. They were expecting it from the detention services. And some departments have might have to take more of a cut, which is unfortunate to deal with this, but it's kind of the reality of the situation. Typically, with a lot of municipalities, you have your general fund budget, which handles a lot of this stuff split, a 40-60 between public safety and other stuff. So, I mean, their concern really is maintaining that level of funding for public safety, even if it has to increase by a few million underneath these shortfalls.
Right. I mean, even the most conservative local, Spokane County resident would say, reasonably, that's one of those must fund type things. When, core units of government is to keep us safe in the counties we live in. So we'll see how it unfolds. Thank you, Tim. Jury duty can be an inconvenience, often leading people to try and get out of it. A new project in Pierce County aims to boost jury participation, but there is a couple twists to this new program. Capitol correspondent Carlene Johnson had the story. What's the problem that this program is meant to solve, Carlene?
Well, I don't know. How many times have you ducked out of jury duty? No, don't.
I've only been called once, said I was a member of the media, and they said, thank you, no thanks.
Yeah,
they don't like it when they don't like to have jurors that report on the prosecutorial office of the county. That typically does not work well.
Well, supposedly it's random, right? But I've been called like 8 times in the last 5 years. And I got one, I think I jinxed myself covering this story of this week, because then the next day I got a jury summons for King County. So there you go. I could not believe it. So by the way, you might want to talk to my boss, because I'm supposed to report on November 13th. But that aside,
okay.
They can't get people to respond often. Right? It's supposed to be illegal, right? To respond, at least to say, okay, here's my request not to serve. Here's my hardship excuse. But a lot of times people don't even respond. So, but when they do respond, they're often excused, saying, financially, I just cannot afford to take a day off. If I'm called for jury duty, or, do get seated for a trial anywhere from 3 days to a week or 2 weeks, whatever.
Sure.
And some companies pay, some companies reimburse, right? If you're
it's state law. You have to you cannot punish somebody for going to serve on jury duty. There's laws against that, but at the same time,
exactly. No requirement.
You don't have to pay them, but you can't fire them is the law, to my understanding. Right. But that means no pay, and that kind of cuts down to the heart of what what this program is doing, right?
Yeah, if you're only going to be paid, here in Washington State, $10 a day to serve, $50 if you happen to be called up for service in federal court, that could be a significant reduction. And then you got people that work in smaller companies. It's a hardship on the company for them to be gone. So their boss might say, I can't afford to lose you for a week. Sorry, you got to get out of it. So that's been the main problem. The other part is a lack of diversity among jury pools. It's tough, and especially you've got folks that are working in lower wage jobs. They can't afford to take, even maybe 1 day or 2 days, I think is the minimum in Washington State that you have to go if you do respond and serve.
Right.
They can't afford it. So that's the impetus for this program that now, as a pilot project, is paying folks who serve jury duty in Pierce County courts, including Tacoma Municipal Court, $100 a day to serve. And apparently they're already getting a response from people saying, oh, hey, I'm willing to do that.
People signing up now. Okay. All right. That's fine. Now, where's this money coming from? Who's paying for this?
Yeah, it was the state lawmakers added $1.6 million in the budget back in 2021. And some of that funded a study that was done through Washington Administrative Office of the Courts. And then they had folks from the Minority Law and Justice Committee and Seattle University conducted this study. They basically required courts all across the state to send out this electronic demographic survey for jury members. So that went out to everybody statewide. And the goal there was to collect data on saying, okay, the folks who do come to serve, what is their race, age, sex, income, education level? And so that was to find out, are these jury members who are able to serve representative of the county where they've been selected?
Got it.
Yeah, and that's a reference to the Sixth Amendment where it says that we're supposed to, for legitimacy and fairness in the courts, we should
judge by a jury of your peers.
Of our pool. Yeah, of our peers. Yeah. So.
Right. Now, is this permanent or is this, you mentioned it's a pilot, but oftentimes pilots are kind of a foregone conclusion that they're going to be there forever.
Yeah. And the gal that I spoke with from the Washington court administration, she said, yeah, no question. That's the goal. So what they're going to do is study for the next 7 months if this deal in Pierce County offering $100 a day to serve, increases the jury pool and diversifies the jury pool. If that is successful, then the Supreme Court's Minority and Justice Commission will then go back to findings for the 2026 legislature. So not this next year, but the following, basically to say, okay, here's how well it worked. And we think you need to expand this statewide. I would imagine that's going to be expensive because the counties will still be responsible for that $10 a day. The other $90 a day is picked up by the state, i.e. all the rest of us taxpayers. I can't imagine it would be cheap, and nobody else in the nation is doing this at this point. But it's going to be interesting to see how much success they have.
So I'm guessing you'll be reporting on this come next session when they report the results. I'll be interested to see how they do.
Yeah.
Thank you, Carlene. Just as people began to learn about a respiratory virus that came from a city in China, Washingtonians were learning about another export from nearby, the Asian murder hornet. Eventually renamed the northern giant hornet, these giant insects represented an existential threat to the state's agriculture industry. After a major effort to eradicate them, the state didn't see another one for quite some time. But Washington editor Brett Davis reported this week that there has been another sighting. Brett, where'd they find this little monster?
So the Washington State Department of Agriculture has received a report of a possible sighting of the northern giant hornet in the Burley area near the city of Port Orchard in Kitsap County. The department said in a recent social media post, that's actually my old neck of the woods. Up until about 10 years ago, I lived in Port Orchard. Anyway, the Ag Department said it's in the process of investigating the suspected sighting of the world's largest hornet. These things can grow to be 2 inches long, so they are rather large. You definitely notice if one landed on you. An ag comms person told me the reporting party will be returning to the location where they saw the hornet in the next few weeks and will attempt to collect it. Now, I'm not sure how you collect a single Asian or northern giant hornet, but I say better them than me.
Yes, I was going to say that. And as long as the party involved is doing it and not me, that's
very, very quiet. I'm hunting hornets.
You sure it's not like a hummingbird or something? But Brett, why are these a threat?
Well, they're apex predators and they're an invasive species here in North America. And they're well known for their aggression and ability to kill bees and other hornet species. So here in Washington State and in the Pacific Northwest in general, honeybees play a significant role in the production of many crops, things like apples, berries, pears, cherries, etc. So these hornets, they would pose a threat to the state's multi-billion-dollar agricultural industry if they're able to gain a foothold here.
Now, yeah, I mean, obviously the pollinators are the biggest risk. And you had given this fascinating story about how honeybees in Asia and, Japan, their natural, they've learned this ability to surround an intruding hornet and heat it up with their bodies to the point of where they can handle it, but the hornet can't kill them.
So they sort of swarm them and cook them.
It's a fascinating thing, but we haven't seen one of these now for quite some time. And there's to say that they're eradicated from a place, you've got to be, without any sightings for a period of time. Now we're saying there's a report of seeing one. Does that mean they're back?
Not necessarily, but officials want to be sure. If Ag is able to collect a specimen and confirm it is a northern giant hornet, it could turn out to just be a one-off, so to speak. There was a detection like that in Snohomish County back in 2020, I was told, where a random hornet was found and they didn't find any subsequent detections. So that doesn't necessarily mean, the insect is back or, still here in Washington, and eradication is a very real possibility. You mentioned eradication. The regulatory definition of that is the state going 3 years without detection. So if they don't detect any more nests this year, we should be in the clear. Ag told me that they're still on track to considered the hornet eradicated from Whatcom County in northern Washington near the Canadian border. That's where the insect was first detected in the Pacific Northwest back in late 2019, coinciding with the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, as you mentioned in your intro.
All right. Well, thank you. Sweet dreams, Brett. Sleep with your windows closed. And a big thank you to our journalists for sharing their stories today. Stay up to date with these and more at thecentersquare.com. I'm Cole Lauterbach. And until next time, this has been Washington in Focus.